Hello lovely people, welcome back to my channel. I am drinking a nice cup of lemon green tea this time in my little, I really feel like I'm very spring today with my little bee mug and the tulips, and even my outfit is kind of making me feel like I could like walk into Stardew Valley maybe? Yeah. Let's talk about all of the books that I recently read. I read some really amazing ones, some kind of disappointing ones, and of course we will be talking about the newest Hunger Games, completely spoiler free today. I even read a 5-star, am I gonna give it 5 stars? Yeah, I read a 5-star book. I thought to kind of switch it up, I would go through the books I recently read from worst to best to kind of give a little structure to it. So you know what, let's just immediately start talking about the book I enjoyed the least out of the ones that I recently read, and that was Count My Lies by Sophie Strava. Doesn't mean that I hated this book, by the way. I don't want to make it sound super bad. I thought, let me give a try to a thriller, because I am not really a thriller girly. I like reading fantasy, I like reading sci-fi, and if it takes place in our world, I like to read romance or like literary fiction, but I've never really read a lot of thrillers. But this one really caught my eye because if there's one thing I love, it's reading about scam artists. And this is about Sloane, who lies her way through everything. She lies her way into becoming like the babysitter for a very wealthy family, and she's kind of enamored by the man in the house, Jay. So through her lies, she kind of starts to infiltrate their life and kind of take over their life maybe. And as you're reading this, you're slowly figuring out all the things that Sloane's lies have led to in the past and the trouble she's gotten herself into. It's very much a book of like, who's lying, who's telling the truth, who's scamming who, and I really liked that concept. I enjoyed this, but I can already tell you that I'm not going to remember anything about this book. I almost forgot to include it in the pile of books because I pretty much forgot that I read this. Some of the plot twists I saw coming immediately from the beginning, which says something as someone who doesn't really read thrillers, so is not very familiar with the common formulas. I will say other parts I really didn't see coming, especially the second half of the book. I was super intrigued, and you know, as a thriller does, it did constantly make me want to keep reading, and I was really invested in every single character's story, and I wanted to figure out like who was right and who was lying. It's just one of those books that stays a little bit shallow. The writing style is super simple. I don't feel like we really dove into the psyche of these characters the way we could have. It's just one of those books where I had a fun time, but not a memorable time. I am not of the opinion that fun immediately means that it's gonna be shallow or not good, but this to me was an example of like purely fun, thrilling escapism, but just absolutely no substance to it whatsoever. So I would give it 3 stars. I enjoyed it, period. But I don't know if maybe thrillers just aren't for me, or if this one just wasn't a very good thriller. Any of my thriller readers in the audience, let me know. Then a book that caught my eye while I was in the bookstore. I read a comic book for Avatar: The Last Airbender called Suki Alone. If you don't know, Avatar: The Last Airbender has a lot of comic books. I am a huge Avatar: The Last Airbender fan. Like, that show was my childhood and it still holds up today. Like, so many of my favorite characters and my favorite themes are from that show, and they have comic books with like extra stories for things that were happening during the show. And this one is about what happened to Suki while she was alone in the Building Rock prison. This was really cute, a short and sweet read. I really like Suki as a character, so it was fun to kind of see how she behaves when she is alone and kind of what her morals are, and we really see her as this like highly moralistic character. And what I also liked is that we do get to learn a little bit of new information that is like actually relevant for like the grander show. I obviously won't spoil what that is, but we get a little bit more information about what life on Kyoshi Island was like, how the people on Kyoshi Island reacted to the war. But other than that, it's mostly really just a story that stands on itself, and I didn't feel like it added a whole lot. It was just fun. If you're a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, if you're a fan of Suki specifically, this is a fun little insight into her as a character, but I don't really feel like we learned a great deal extra the way you do with, for example, the comics about The Search, which are about Zuko's mom, where you get to know so much more lore. This really felt like it could be like a filler episode, so just fine. I'm just happy to have more Avatar comics in my possession because I just like everything Avatar: The Last Airbender. Then I read the ebook for Water Moon. I started reading this book because everyone was saying like this is the new book for Ghibli fans. I have a lot of feelings about this book, and none of them are neutral. If you are a fan of the Ghibli movies, this book was supposed to give like the same vibe. And I understand why people say that. You can very clearly tell that the author got inspiration from Ghibli movies. Let me tell you what it's about. It takes place in Tokyo, and our main character is taking over the pawn shop from her father, but it's not a normal pawn shop. It is a special pawn shop where you enter unknowingly, like you think you're going into a ramen shop, but then it turns out to be a pawn shop because there is something in your life that you regret, that you're sorry about, and you can kind of pawn away that memory of that thing that you regret. So you can finally let it go, which is such a wonderful concept. And you can imagine there would be so many stories of so many people having certain regrets and then coming to the pawn shop and talking about their feelings. But unfortunately, we just leave that almost immediately. This is such a pet peeve of me when books have this super interesting concept that you could explore without really having to have an intricate plot. Like you could just make it vibe and character based, but then instead of focusing on their cool concept, the author introduces some random mystery plotline so that there is a plot for the characters to go on. And that is what happens in this book. Like we almost immediately leave the pawn shop because I already even forgot what they were gonna do. Oh yeah, her father goes missing, I think. So they're going to look for him. And the entire book is basically just one big fever dream adventure story of our main character and one of the pawn shop clients going on this journey to find her father. And that journey is very Ghibli-esque. And I don't mean Ghibli-esque in the way of House Moving Castle or Totoro, but it is Ghibli-esque in the sense of Spirited Away. Or a lot of people have also mentioned The Boy and the Heron, as in it's this kind of fever dreamish travel sequence where they go through like magical cathedrals in the clouds and like magical candy shops and historical veiled villages. My favorite part is where they go to a magical cathedral where you can get your fate tattooed on you. And our main character has like all these lines over her body that illuminate and show her her entire life's fate. And exactly who she's going to end up marrying, that kind of stuff. Super cool. This book is chock full of such interesting, beautiful ideas. Like the imagery in this book, like the places that these characters go to. Wow. Exactly like a Ghibli movie. And I also think this book would make for an amazing animated film because you could make so much amazing art inspired by this book. Like the things the author comes up with, beautiful. As you can tell, very, very positive things to say. But like I said at the beginning, I have many thoughts and none of them are neutral. I also have hate thoughts for this book. Because yeah, it's really cool, but this book goes at an absolute breakneck pace. Like the moment we would be at this new cool place, instead of just like being there and simmering in the themes, we would just immediately move on to somewhere else. And don't even get me started on the insta love. Oh, talking about a book with an unnecessary romance plotline. So we have our main character from the pawn shop and this random client. After like 100 pages, he's already like, wow, you're such like a more beautiful person than you could ever know. Like before the 100th page, he's already like, I see you, I see your courage. Like he's some kind of spiritual leader or something. I think this entire book takes place in, I'm sure like less than a week, and they completely fall in love and they're like, wow, we could never leave each other. We are like fated to be together. And I was like, can we not? Can we not? I have never been so jump scared by a spicy scene. I have no problems with a spicy scene, so if you can jump scare me with them and make me feel uncomfortable with them, you're doing something wrong. And it really didn't help that every single one of these characters was completely one-dimensional. Maybe it has something to do with the writing style. The writing style felt so flat, like I felt so removed from all of these characters, and you can tell that the author was trying to make like a big emotional storyline because it's so melodramatic. Like I cannot overemphasize how melodramatic this gets towards the end, but it just doesn't work because the author never takes the time to just, you know, stand still for a second at one singular place or one singular character or one singular emotion. So yeah, all in all, I ended up giving this 3 stars because I just have very positive but also very negative feelings for it, and I don't really know how to sum up my opinion. It is genuinely a book that feels like a Ghibli movie though. The next book that I read is The Opposite of a Person by Lieke Marsman. This is the Dutch version, but there is an English version as well. This is what we call in the Netherlands an ideas novel. I don't know if that's a term in other countries as well in English, where yes, it's a novel, but really it's an exploration of human versus nature and how we as humans deal with climate change, how lonely we are as people, and what our identity or our search for identity has to do with how we look onto climate change and nature around us. You can tell that the author is also a philosopher. Now, I was very quickly sucked in because of the opening chapter, like the first sentence. Oh, you know I love a good first sentence. The first sentence of this novel is, when I was a child, I liked to fantasize about being a cucumber. That is kind of the silly vibe that you get from this book. We have a story about a main character kind of growing up and getting into her first relationship, and that is interlinked with, I guess, kind of philosophical musings about nature around us and what it means to be a human and what it means to get into relationships. The author is also a poet, so sometimes it can get very poetic, very, very abstract. So it took me a while to kind of get the book and get into the interesting way that it's written, because like I said, it's not just prose, it's not just a novel, it is a novel interlinked with essay, interlinked with poetry. But I do actually really like that combination, and especially towards the end, I got super emotional. The author has such beautiful insights about the despair that we feel as human beings, about a feeling of powerlessness, but also about how we are desperately craving connection from other people, but can never fully find it. She really touches on so many different themes in only 170 pages. I am super impressed by this author, and I immediately bought another book by her, and I'm really excited to read more by her. The Opposite of a Person. We're getting into top 3 territory now. Third best book that I recently read is, let's finally talk about it, Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the new Hunger Games book. Oh my gosh, the way that I've been looking forward to this. Firstly, I just want to say, if you've read the book and you want full spoiler analysis, I have a whole video dedicated to that. I will link it in the description so you can watch that. But now I will give you my non-spoiler review. So Suzanne Collins decided to write Haymitch's Hunger Games. So that means that this is a prequel. We are going back 25 years in time and we were following Haymitch, who is the mentor in the original Hunger Games. Where do I even start? I think the main thing that struck me while reading this book is that it genuinely made me feel like I was reading the Hunger Games again for the first time. Because this story really does follow, I think out of all of the Hunger Games book out there, this one really follows a very similar structure and plotline to the original Hunger Games book. And I've seen some people say that that disappointed them, that it felt like Susan Collins was just trying to recreate the Hunger Games, but I'm very certain that this was intentional. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, but it is very clear that Susan Collins intentionally creates a lot of parallels between Haymitch and Katniss, because that is like necessary in like the grander scheme of themes and messages that she weaves with her novels, and like you wouldn't get it. Again, I go into that in my spoilery over analysis video. The main themes that Susan Collins explores in this book are propaganda, the influence of propaganda from governments, the techniques governments or like authoritarian governments use to convince the people to submit, basically, or to look down on certain people. Because when you think about it, like, how on earth does a government succeed at making people enjoy watching a game where children kill each other? Like, that is very unrealistic, but that is also kind of the point of the series. It is, what does this government do to make people go along with something so insane? Because that's something governments do in real life too. There are so many horrible things that countries and governments do that people seem to just be okay with because of government propaganda. And I love Susan Collins for making those concepts very accessible and very clear in a book targeted at teenagers and young adults. And it's a fun added bonus that it also feels very nostalgic to read a book like this, that it's also just really thrilling and exciting and sitting at the edge of your seat kind of story. I will say, if you compare it to the other prequel, The Bands of Songbirds and Snakes, that is a book that added like new themes to the trilogy. I feel like this book, with its themes of propaganda, is kind of touching on the same things that the original trilogy was also already doing. It's just that this time it is more in depth and also way more on the nose. Like, you can kind of tell that Susan Collins was like, okay guys, you didn't get it the first time, so I'm just gonna spell it out for you the second time. And that's, I think, why she wrote this book. It is also full of little callbacks to the original trilogy, many cameos of characters that we know. I understand that some people are a little bit like, okay, it feels a little bit too fan servicey, and I did at some points feel like, okay, it's a little bit too much of a coincidence that all of the characters that we know from the original trilogy happen to all just congregate around Haymitch. I felt that was a little bit unrealistic, but it didn't bother me too much. I also am just convinced that Susan Collins is just not very good at writing romance. Like, one of the main things in this book is that Haymitch has a girlfriend back home and he's like so in love with her and he does everything to like try to get her back. And there was, I'm gonna be honest, not a single moment that I truly believed it, that I truly felt it. And I had the same thing with The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, with Snow and Lucy. Susan Collins is not really capable of making me believe romance. Except for Peeta and Katniss, okay? I'm never gonna get over Peeta and Katniss. Let's just say that Susan Collins should never write a romantasy novel. Imagine what The Hunger Games would look like if it was a romantasy novel. A game of fire and hunger. The hunter and the rose. I am gonna make fake covers for these. Anyway, I highly recommend you pick up this book. If you grew up with the Hunger Games, this is like required reading for you. And if you are someone, I know that there are a lot of people out there who really grew up with the Hunger Games movies, but haven't actually read the books, like, let this be the moment that you pick up the books. I also think you could, yeah, I'm actually pretty certain that you could just read this book without having read the original trilogy if you have seen all the movies and if you are very familiar with the movies. And also The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. So you need to know the original 3 books or movies and The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and then you can read this book. I'm also so excited to be hosting the little real life book clubs that I'm gonna be doing with some of you guys. I cannot wait to talk to you guys in real life about this book and just discuss it and overanalyze every little detail. So yeah, I ended up giving this 4 stars. Very good. Susan Collins never misses. Okay, 2 books left. The second best book that I read lately was The Safekeep by Jaël van der Wouden. I read this on ebook as well. This is literary historical fiction, not my usual genre, but I was very pleasantly surprised. It takes place in 60s the Netherlands. The author is also Dutch, which I find super cool, but it is originally written in English. And the book has also been nominated for the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I know that it's also now nominated for the Booker Prize. Very proud Dutchie here. But it takes place in 60s the Netherlands, and we follow a young girl, Isabella, who lives in the house that her mother died in. And when her brother comes to live with her together with her brother's new girlfriend, she is really kind of annoyed with this new girlfriend because it feels like she's trespassing in like a family home, in like her family territory. And this kind of starts this kind of heady, summary, a lot of people call it obsession. I don't want to call it obsession, but intrigue that arises between this girlfriend and our main character Isabella. They are like opposites. Isabella is this very control freak, kind of introverted person, and the brother's girlfriend Eva is very kind of chaotic, unmannered, very free. So they are each other's antitheses, but they have a kind of intrigue with each other. And I think what is good to know is that homosexuality at this time was not very accepted. So despite them very clearly being attracted to each other in some way, they cannot explicitly say anything about it. And it's honestly like such a feat that in this entire novel, being lesbian or being gay is not mentioned once. Like, one thing that this novel does so well is subtext. Everything in this book happens in the subtext, between the lines, the words that are not spoken. And that creates such a tension. Ooh, this literary novel created better romantic tension that I've seen in many a romance book that I've read. I also really like that this is a very good example of how you can use spicy scenes and eroticism, and that doesn't immediately mean that your book is now shallow, as some people unfortunately like to think. Jaël van der Wouden really uses eroticism in a way that just fits the themes of the novel so well, and it just aids the yearning and longing between these characters. Like, if you want to read about 2 people yearning for each other, yeah. I also loved the writing style. This is a good example of how you can write beautifully without being very lyrical. I think when people think of beautiful writing, they tend to think of very lyrical, purpley prose. This is a very simple writing style, but still gorgeous, just from the words that she uses for everything. It's like so on point. I think you would like this if you like Sally Rooney. And I guess it's just another book from a very emotionally suppressed culture. I gave this 4.5 stars. Gorgeous. Never read a literary fiction novel that kept me on the edge of my seat like this. Okay, and then the best novel that I recently read that I just finished it, and I think I'm gonna give it 5 stars. It is the little book that is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This won the Booker Prize in 2024. Wow, I'm really on my literary fiction Booker Prize vibe right now, I guess. It is only 130 pages and it should not have been longer. And I say this as someone who loves this book. This is one of those books that needed to be short, and that is why it is so powerful. This book has no plot. It doesn't really focus on the characters. It just is. We follow 6 astronauts in a spaceship that orbits around the Earth 16 times in one singular day. And they are all doing like science projects in this spaceship. But that's not really the point. The point of this book is just gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous descriptions of Earth seen from space. I am in awe of how many different ways this author came up for describing seeing like day turning into night on the Earth's orb. I can just imagine this author spent a long time on Google Earth looking at the map and just describing it. It may sound boring, but it's gorgeous. We follow a little bit of the lives of these astronauts, the lives that they had on Earth, what it's like being an astronaut, what it does to your body to live in low gravity all the time, the interactions that they have with each other, but mostly the relationship they build with the Earth. And I know this is kind of based on like a real phenomenon that astronauts, when they go into space, tend to form this really strong protective feeling for the Earth. That when you look at the Earth from outer space for so long and you see just the water and the land and you see the complete lack of borders, basically the complete lack of any kind of man-made concept, you start feeling really protective of it, of like, this is this thing that we need to protect and take care of, and all these human concepts that we have, they make no sense. Like we really are just one big Earth. And that feeling is expertly captured in this short novella. There are so many gorgeous passages about what it means to be human, what it means to be, let's say, someone from Earth, someone from planet Earth, how small it all is, how tiny we all are. This book is basically the literary equivalent of someone being like, yeah, so have you ever thought about how we're actually just like floating on this big rock in space? That, but then actually well thought out in like a beautiful literary style. I've said this before and I'll say it again, the best kind of literary books are the ones that are about themes that are technically cliche. Like technically this whole thing of like, wow, we really are just like one small speck in a giant universe. We're all just floating on this rock. That is a super cliche, I'm 14 and this is deep kind of sentiment. But it rings true. There's a reason that it has become a cliche, and in the hands of a skilled author, you can take this cliche thought and kind of reimagine it and write it down in such a way that we see it again for what it is, and that is not just this cliche idea, but a beautiful idea that we should maybe not just dismiss as something cliche, but reconsider and take a little time to digest. I read this book very, very slowly. It is 130 pages, so technically you could read it in like a few days, but I think the feeling that this book is supposed to give you is best experienced if you read just like a chapter a day and just kind of let it sink in. So yeah, I'm really on my literary fiction kick lately. If you have any good recommendations in the same style, let me know. Does this count as science fiction? Because it takes place in space, but there's not really anything science fiction-y about it. At first I was like, oh, it's science fiction, but there's nothing fictional about the science in this book, if I'm correct. Moving on to what I am going to be reading next. I actually picked up a book recently that I'm probably gonna make a video about because I really thought it was gonna be bad, and then I picked it up and now I'm like obsessed with it. but it's also still pretty bad. But it is Heartless Hunter, which is like one of the biggest romantasy books at the moment, about like a blood witch that falls in love with a witch hunter. Cliche, blah blah blah. We've seen it before, but I'm kind of having fun. I'm really craving like a good, fun romantasy book that isn't just like the cliche book talk stuff over and over again. I just want to read something like Serpent and the Wings of Night or One Dark Window. So if you have any recommendations for romantasy books that you think I might enjoy, that are just like dark and gritty and a little spicy and sizzling and just fun, but not like so book talk cliche, please, I am begging you for recommendations. And then I think I might make a video about it where I just read a bunch of popular romantasy books to see which ones are good, to spare you reading more bad romantasy. Well, those were all the books that I wanted to talk about today, my little babies. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble about these novels. Let me know what your favorite book was that you read in the past few months. And I think I'm just gonna say goodbye. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Goodbye.